Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mountain Lake Journal. I'm Tom Halleck. We begin this week with the stunning development. The White House has withdrawn the nomination of North Country Congresswoman Elise Stefanik to be the ambassador to the United Nations. The reason? Concern among Republicans about holding on to their razor-thin majority in the U.S. House. The Congresswoman was the very first cabinet pick Mr. Trump made after winning the election back in November. But since then, she has continued to serve in the House for weeks now, while awaiting Senate confirmation. With Republicans only having a 2-vote margin, Stefanik's vote has been critical in passing budget resolutions and other key legislation that has made it through the House during the first few weeks of the new Trump administration. The president took to social media on Thursday afternoon to announce the move, saying that as he tries to advance his America First agenda, that it is essential to maintain every Republican seat in Congress. Mr. Trump saying he asked Stefanik, who has been one of his biggest allies, to remain in Congress to help deliver the votes needed to pass his agenda of tax cuts and other critical issues, such as border security. The president saying with such a narrow, tight majority, he doesn't want to take a chance on anyone else running for Stefanik's seat. He said he has asked her to stay in Congress and rejoin the House leadership team. And we're joined now by former North Country Congressman Bill Owens, who is spending some time vacationing in Hilton Head, South Carolina. We appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Delighted to be here, Tom.
You surprised by this?
Not completely. The fact that they were stringing this out for so long meant, in my mind, they were trying to weigh what the likely outcome was going to be in the two congressional special elections in Florida and potentially in the North Country. Obviously, they only have a 3-seat spread. If they were to lose 2 of those, they'd lose the majority. I think there's some significant concern about the seat in Florida. As you probably saw, Mr. DeSantis was highly critical of the candidate over the last several days. I thought in an embarrassing way. That's a kind of conversation you'd have privately if you felt that, not out in public. But be that as it may. And obviously they're concerned about our district as well. I think Blake has made some significant inroads and is gathering some momentum. And then, of course, we have to say thank you to Mr. Constantino for indicating he might run as a third-party candidate.
So Blake Gendabine is the Democratic choice. We sat down with him this week. In fact, it was going to be our first interview with him to introduce him to many people who may not know him yet. He is a political newcomer. He was the choice of the 15 Democratic Party chairs in the 15 counties that make up the 21st congressional district. The Republicans still haven't made their choice who their candidate was going to be. The Conservatives came out this week and said that their preferred choice was Dan Steck, North Country State Senator Dan Steck. But it seemed the Republicans were going to wait until Elise Stefanik actually vacated her seat, and then they would announce who their candidate was going to be. Of course, Dan Steck and many others hoping that they would align with the Conservatives and choose him.
That's certainly the way it seems to be playing out. My suspicion is that the National Republican Committee was communicating with at least some of the chairs and indicating, hold tight. We don't quite know where this is going, so let's not get out in front of ourselves. Let's see how this plays out. I can imagine that Elise is somewhat frustrated and maybe a little bit surprised that Mr. Trump would do this to her. But then again, it is Mr. Trump.
As you also mentioned this week, some developments. While Dan Steck was mentioned to be the preferred choice of the Conservative Party, and still waiting to see what the Republican chairs, what their choice would be, one of the other Republicans in the running, another political newcomer, a businessman from Amsterdam, Anthony Constantino, had mentioned that he wanted the GOP bosses to choose him, and if they didn't, that he was seriously considering, in his words, an independent run in a special election, which obviously would be a problem for the Republicans and conservatives if they had another right-leaning candidate announce that he was going to run as an independent.
Certainly, that would create some chaos, I think, in the district. There's also been some other interesting developments that I think could be at play here. There are two state Senate seats in Pennsylvania that went Democratic in special elections. That tells you that, and these were districts that Mr. Trump won by in excess of 15 points 4 months ago, and they've now moved to a Democrat. Now, is that voter turnout? Could be. But I also think it gives a pretty good indication that people are at least nervous with what's going on in Washington and maybe disgruntled. And that could have some significant bearing on the outcome of all of these races.
Do you think this is pretty definitive, the White House withdrawing Elise Stefanik's nomination, or is it possible they could see what happens with those races in Florida if they both go to Republicans? Could they reconsider?
Absolutely. And I think that's probably in the cards. I think Elise has been a very strong supporter of Mr. Trump, and I'm sure he still wants to reward her. So that's certainly, I think, highly likely.
The special election obviously here on hold now with Elise Stefanik remaining where she is for the time being. We mentioned Blake Gendebien, the Democrat who we sat down with this week. You have met him. You probably haven't had a chance to talk with him since all of this has happened, but would your guess be that he would be a candidate who would now stick around into next year, into 2026, with the midterms already coming up just a year from now?
I suspect that's, again, very likely. He's been quite successful, I think, getting out there, getting his name known. And I think that Elise will eventually get a position during this first 2 years of the Trump administration, and therefore vacate her seat, even if it's closer in time to the 26 election. So I suspect he'll be here by the time we get to the 26 election, either because he's run in this special and won, or because there is no special and he decides to run in 26.
The obvious question, though, the 21st district now leaning certainly a red district, much more so than when you ran back in 2009 and 2010 and 2012. And for a Democrat, is it winnable, New York 21, or are there just too many Republicans? Is it too red of a district? Much of it through redistricting, but is it too red of a district in this day and age for a Democrat to be able to win here like you did?
I think that the situation in Florida Congressional District 6 is very instructive. That is a district that Mr. Trump won by 30 points. It's now a toss-up. So that means they've lost somewhere in excess of 25 points. And that's evidence, I think, that many Republicans are concerned about what's going on. Now, Florida may be a little unique because of the concentration of seniors and the discussions that Musk has been having about Social Security and Medicare has probably lit the candle for many of those people. But that's the kind of thing that creates a change in politics when you would least expect it.
And do you think for a political newcomer, he would have a shot if Blake Gendebien does run? Do you think voters would go for a fresh face?
I think that, again, that's very likely if the trends that are occurring in Florida 6 occur throughout the country. And we have a district, I think, that could move in that direction. As you might recall, when I was in office, I used to refer to my constituents as Rockefeller Republicans and Reagan Democrats. Maybe we'll come back to that and get us back to more rational thinking.
How much of an influence do you think what we're seeing right now, and granted it's early, if there's no special election and we're waiting until next year now for the midterms, do you think up here in New York 21 that there's going to be voter frustration over what they're seeing in Washington? Not just the large proposed cuts in the number of departments and positions, but with what's happening with Canada. Do you think the tariffs and the potential harm to the U.S.-Canada relationship is something that's going to weigh on voters here in the 21st District?
I think very definitely so. And if the chaos continues, through the balance of 25 and into 26, and we see declines in Canadian visitors, that I think could have a tremendous impact, because that will negatively impact lots of small businesses. Think of the marinas, the motels, the shopping centers, all will be negatively impacted. And people are going to feel that. And if that happens, plus you see a continuing sort of turmoil in the inflation sector, if you see prices not declining, I think people will be very upset. And those were things that Mr. Trump campaigned on. And if he doesn't produce, I think that will have a very negative impact.
We haven't really seen the effects of the tariffs quite yet. We're still sort of in that waiting period. We're expecting that they're going to kick in next week, the first week in April. The president just within the past couple of days announcing the 25% tariffs on autos and auto parts. So we're still sort of waiting to see how it all plays out. But there's obviously concern here in the North Country. There are a number of manufacturers. Certainly we have Nova Bus making buses. We have rail cars and subway cars being made by Alstom. And there's parts that go back and forth into making the buses and the subway cars. And so really at this point, we're still waiting to see how much the manufacturers here in the North Country are going to be impacted by these tariffs.
That's absolutely correct. We don't know completely. Another piece of this puzzle is maybe 3 weeks ago, there was a one-liner in one of the major newspapers where the Trump administration said, oh, by the way, if you are qualified for the USMCA, the tariffs don't apply. Right? Now, that represents 38% of the trade between the United States and Canada, those products that are USMCA qualified. So that's going to have an impact. I also think, even though Canadian individuals, shoppers, vacationers, may reject coming to the U.S., I think some businesses will decide to move their production here to avoid the tariffs. And I think we'll see some of that. Now, is that enough to replace what's happening on the retail side of things? I'm not sure, but it's certainly going to have some positive impact on us.
Bill Owens, as always, thank you very much for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
With Congresswoman Stefanik staying put, there will be no need to hold a special election to replace her in the 21st District. Just this week, the Conservative Party in New York announced that North Country State Senator Dan Steck was their preferred choice to be that candidate to run for the Conservative Party. Steck welcoming that news and saying that he hoped the Republicans would follow suit and choose him as their candidate as well. Steck did put out a statement late Thursday on Elise Stefanik's nomination being withdrawn. In the statement, Steck said that Congresswoman Elise Stefanik is a true strong leader and would have been a fantastic UN ambassador. The withdrawal of her nomination is extraordinarily disappointing news for her, and as her friend, I empathize greatly. I'm proud to support Elise Stefanik, he said, in all her endeavors, and will continue partnering with her to make our region, state, and nation safer, stronger, more secure, and more economically prosperous. This week, we sat down with the Democrats' choice, Blake Gendabine, a dairy farmer from Lisbon, New York in St. Lawrence County, a political newcomer who was picked by party chairs in the 15 counties that make up the 21st Congressional District to be the Democratic nominee once Elise Stefanik vacated her seat and Governor Hochul made the call for a special election to fill that seat. Jen DeBean's campaign put out a statement reacting to the news and saying that he indeed plans to run for the 21st Congressional District seat, if not in a special election this year, then in the midterms next year in 2026. He said the administration is keeping Stefanik in the House because they need her to vote to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, VA benefits, and rural education in order to give billions of dollars in handouts to the ultra-wealthy. Jen DeBean said he is committed to representing the community that raised him, regardless of when that election is. A spokesperson for Elise Stefanik, by the way, did not immediately respond to her request for comment.